Well, this morning we're launching into a new series. We're calling it Chill. And the idea behind this is we want to look at how we find rest every day. And we're going to talk over the next 4 weeks about this idea of Sabbath and what Sabbath looks like. So this week we're actually going to kind of introduce the concept and then talk about how we actually live this out on a daily basis. So to start off, I want to share with you a story this morning. It actually happened to be a couple years ago, 3 years ago, during our summer series for Lighthouse. We actually started filming a series of videos for a series we were calling Road Trip, where we went on these little road trips all over the place. Those of you who are there will remember this. And one of the places that we went was to the top of Pikes Peak. And I drove my car to the top of Pikes Peak, which is a terrifying experience. If you have the opportunity to take the cogwheel, rail, take that instead, because there's times when you're driving and there's nothing to your right and there's nothing to your left and you're cresting this mountain and you aren't entirely sure there's road on the other side and you could just drive off. You don't know. On the way down, it's a lot better. I'll say that. But there's an interesting thing that happens on the way down when you're driving down Pikes Peak. There's a station for brake checks. And when you stop at this brake check station, there's a person there that takes a thermometer and actually reads the temperature of your brake calipers or your rotors to see how hot they are. And if they think that your brakes are too hot, they ask you to pull aside and wait for several minutes where they have conveniently placed a gift store. But if your brakes aren't too hot, they tell you there's a gift store, but tell you can proceed. And it's interesting because driving down, I was almost certain, because I was riding my brakes really hard, I was terrified I was going to die, that I was going to have to stop. And they were like, actually, your brakes are good. You guys can keep going. And I was like, oh, kind of proud of myself. But there's an interesting theory, or not interesting theory, there's interesting science behind this, right? There's a reason why they do this. It's because it is safer if your brakes are safer for you to drive down a mountain. I've never experienced the feeling of driving down a mountain without brakes. But when I go on 70 and I go through the tunnels and on the other side I see those semi runoff ramps, every time I pass one of those, I think, man, I'm really glad my brakes are working right now. This past week, we actually went up in the mountains for a little bit, my family did, and there's a semi that was going pretty fast, and it was driving right towards one of those. And Ashley and I were like, oh my gosh, it's actually, is it gonna hit the runoff? And then it turned at the last minute, we were like, oh, we were disappointed. But not at the same, then we felt bad that we were disappointed. There's a reason, though, that they do the brake check on Pikes Peak is sometimes the brakes actually just need a rest. And it's an illustration, obviously, that's not a very cloaked illustration, right? We are no different than that. At some level, we all need rest. And the truth that we want to look at and wrestle with through this series and this morning is that if we don't take time, we need to rest and recharge, we will find ourselves in a place where we cannot function at the level we were created to. If all you do is drive down mountains, at some point your brakes are going to fail if you never stop, if they never get a break, if they never cool down. You're the same. At some level, if you keep going and going and going and going, I'm the same. That eventually you're going to run into something and crash. You're not going to be able to sustain it. You were created to rest. I want to look at this in Genesis chapter 1, right? This is the very beginning, right? God is creating, and I want to look at kind of the end of this process when he creates man and woman. Then God said, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, both male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over all the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heavens, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, not just Not just man, right? He saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and rested on the seventh day for all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. It's an interesting passage, right? Because in this short passage between the end of Genesis 1 and the beginning of Genesis 2, you have God instituting this idea of work for man, right? Like God creates man in his own image and immediately gives him a job, right? Like this is your earth, subdue it, be fruitful, multiply, right? You have work to do. And then on the seventh day, God does something really interesting. He takes a break and he rests. And for those of us who grew up in church, like that's not that big of a deal. We know God rested on the seventh day. But here's my question is, why did God rest? Like, what was the purpose of it? You think God needs rest? You think God couldn't go another day without taking a break? Like when we think of God and his infinite power, like God doesn't need rest like we need rest. Was he tired? Did he need to re-energize from all the creating that he had done? But what if it was something different? What if there was another reason that God chose to rest? What if God chose to rest for our benefit? Keep in mind, right? He had just given Adam and Eve instruction on work, and then he chose to rest. And then something happens in this process where he institutes something that's more than just a break. And I want to explore that concept today. And what we're looking at, right, we see this in verse 3. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. There's a blessing and a holiness to this day of rest. The word that we use for this is this word right here, Shabbat. We say Sabbath. The Hebrew says Shabbat. If you ever hear someone who is of Jewish origin, sometimes we'll say Shabbat Shalom, right? It's a blessing for the Sabbath period. This is the idea. In this word Shabbat, it's more than just a break. It's more than just the day off. There's something bigger that I want to explore this morning. Because the truth is, you need rest. You need Sabbath in your life. I need rest. I need Sabbath in my life. God created us to need this. God created us with a need that can only be met when we rest in the way that he designated, the way he designed it. And I want to explore a little bit more about this. If you have your Bibles, you can flip to Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. And I don't think I have a slide for this verse for some reason. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11, it says this: remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or your sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And again, right, you were created to need rest. There's a holiness. And don't misconstrue the idea with Sabbath for Sunday. Because when Moses is given this commandment on Mount Sinai, he was given the same word that is used in Genesis 2, that Shabbat, that rest. Right? It's not say, hey, take the day off, make sure you don't do too much on church day. It's no. Take your rest day, take your Sabbath. The same word that God we see for God using rest is the same where we get this idea of resting. And it's the same that we see when God instituted this law with the people of Israel. God created the concept of Sabbath for us. And God rested as an example that we are to live by, because God's rhythms of work and rest become the framework for our work and rest. Did you know that until unions occurred, that the 5-day work week wasn't a thing? Like, there's a big push right now for a 4-day work week. But like, which is crazy to me, because I feel like even with 5 days, I can't get all my work in. Anybody feel me on that one? Remember when email was supposed to make our lives so much better? There's coffee mugs that you can buy that says, I just came out of another meeting that could have been an email. But before unions existed, the 5-day work week wasn't a thing. It was a 6-day work week. And just as, remember, as God instituted the idea of rest, he also instituted the idea of work. He gave Adam and Eve this plan for working. You are to work 6 days, but then after that, right, you choose to rest. There's a day that is set aside, and it's specific. It is for rest. God's rhythm of work and rest became the framework of our work and rest. This is the part where some of you may be thinking, well, Joel, you don't know how busy I am. You don't know the things that are on my plate that I need to get done. And if I'm honest, there are many days where I have worked Sunday to Sunday and didn't take that day. But I want to read a quote from a book called Subversive Sabbath. It's by a pastor named A.J. Swoboda, and this is what he says. He says, as God invites us to Sabbath, we will be tempted to think that Sabbath cannot work for us. I don't have time to take a whole day to rest. People have expressed to me for years. Biblically, however, this is not the case. The biblical story tells us that to rest 1 day a week is to be truly human, and to not rest is to be inhuman. Humans are made to rest. When we say we don't have time to rest, we cannot find time for something that has already been found. God invites us to rest. God rests. Are we stronger or wiser or better than God? Sabbath is holy, but our disregard for it is disregarding something that God has designated as holy. So when you say, I don't have time for that, you're inadvertently saying that you know better with how you were designed than God does. And you say, well, God doesn't know my deadlines. God doesn't know the amount of work I have. Well, yeah, he does, actually. There was a time when I got hired as a youth pastor at a church in Texas, and my pastor at the time Sabbath is something that's very important to him. And he told me, hey, you are a Sunday through Friday or a Sunday through Thursday employee. On Friday and Saturday, you do not work. You take your time off. You spend time with your family, and you better take your Sabbath. And he goes, if I catch you working once on a Friday, you get a warning. The second time, I'll fire you. He was serious about it too. You know how I know he was serious about it? He caught me working one time on a Friday. I was walking down the hall and I see him, and it's one of these things, it's a long hallway, and I see him on the other side, and I'm like, there's no way I can turn around at this point. Like, I am caught. And he walks up to me and he goes, why are you here on a Friday? I did not have the gall to ask him why he was there on a Friday. But I said, it's just a really busy season. I'm just trying to get a few extra things done. And he goes, I understand busy seasons, but you know you're not supposed to work on Friday. This is your one warning. And I said, yes, sir. He said, go home. I said, yes, sir. Never worked on a Friday again, at least not at the office. To understand the why and how behind the concept of Sabbath, we have to first acknowledge the fact that we have a need for rest. There was never probably a time where I was more aware of this, really 2 times in my life. One is when I was in college and staying up all night to study or write papers because the time I should have been using to study and write papers, I was not. Or right after I had a newborn baby, right? That's Ryan and Alyssa right here. They brought their newborn baby today, and she's cute. But we feel you. I feel you, because that time in my life, that's the time I was so aware that I needed rest. It's the moments when I was in college and I'm sitting taking a test and I fall asleep in the middle of the test and wake up to like literally drool on my test. It's not a joke. That happened. Right? It's the idea that I needed rest, right? It's the realization that I have pushed myself and pushed myself and pushed myself. And if I don't sleep soon, I may not make it. See, God created within us a need that can only be met when we rest in the way that he designed. Oh, there it is. Our physical need for rest is a direct sign of our spiritual need for sanctification. This is what I mean. I want you to follow me with this train of thought. Right? Being physically tired shows us how badly we need something. But our condition of needing rest is a condition of dependency on God. And so when we are physically tired, it shows us how badly we need God to save us from something. And we know this, especially for those of us who read scripture, we are all born in need of a savior. We just took communion together to signify our need for Jesus. So even the fact that we need Sabbath, that we need rest, points us to the fact that we need to be saved from something. From a broken world where sin exists, where each and every one of us has chosen to sin at some point. So our physical rest, our physical need for rest, directly signifies our spiritual need for sanctification. I'll even take it a step further. When we don't take time to physically rest, we choose to walk in sin and disobey God. So if you think that you can, just keep filling up your cups of coffee and getting that extra Red Bull or Monster Energy drink, and that you can keep pushing through, and you know that you should really take the time off to rest, but you're going to work through it anyway, and you start feeling it, the people close to you start feeling it, I'll tell you my biggest indicator that I have not been taking my Sabbath time is that I become short with my wife and kids. Whatever your indicator is, that thought process that you can just push through it and you'll find time to rest on vacation, you weren't designed to rest 3 times a year when you go out of town. You're designed to rest weekly. And when we don't do that, we actually choose to disobey God. So the next time you're pushing through and you're scheduling out your week and go, well, I know I'm not supposed to meet up people on Fridays or Saturdays. And I'm supposed to take Sunday off, and I'm just going to, do a little work at night after the kids go to bed. I need you to wrestle with the fact that what you're doing in the process is if you're choosing to specifically put away your time of rest, you're choosing to walk into disobedience of God. And man, that conviction's heavy for me sometimes. We planned this series over a year ago. And I would really not like to work out on paper how many weeks since the year I planned this, I have chosen not to do this. Because if I'm honest, this is a place where I have walked in sin even this past year, where I've chosen not to work, to push through. There's always an excuse though, right? For me, it's, well, Easter's coming up. we're relaunching all this logo and we're trying to get this merch done. We got to paint all these walls. Well, we have to have this meeting. We have this big vision concept that we're working through, and I got to make sure that all the pieces are in place. What is it for you? Is it the big project that's been looming? It's the contract that you've really been trying to land? It's just to make sure you keep your job? But what is the cost? And is the cost worth it? Remember, God instituted work and Sabbath. And it's really interesting because as we look at the 10 commandments and we see that God commanded us to keep the Sabbath holy, out of all of those commandments, Sabbath is the only one that pre-existed sin. Sabbath existed before sin entered the world. It wasn't until after sin entered the world that humanity struggled with the concept of rest. And if you struggle to take time each week to rest and to Sabbath, here's this: know that you're not alone. In fact, I would garner to say most every single one of us in this room has struggled with this at some point. This is a struggle and a sin that many have fallen into over and over again. The Bible is full of accounts of the people of Israel not keeping the Sabbath. But if we can work to find a rhythm of work and rest, Sabbath is something that can give us so much more than just a few extra hours of sleep on the weekend. It has the ability to bring us physical health, relational health, and spiritual health as well. To understand this concept more, I want to look at it further in the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 31. In Exodus chapter 31, verse 12, it says this, right? You are to speak to the people of Israel and say that above all you shall keep my Sabbaths. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. I thought the fear of firing was bad. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath, a solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore, the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. Right? Sabbath is a promise between God and his people. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. The seriousness of the law is seen by the punishment if someone was found breaking it. That if you didn't take the Sabbath, if you didn't take the seventh day to rest, you may as well just be put to death because you're breaking that covenant with God. You're like, that's really harsh. We just talked about how all of us are struggling with this. But I want to look at the seriousness of the concept of Sabbath without focusing on the punishment. Because Sabbath was a promise between God and Israel of labor and refreshment. We were made to work. You were made to work. But we were also made to be refreshed and rested. You see, to function how we were created, we have to dedicate time to rest. Because it's how we were designed. We have to dedicate our time to rest how we were designed to rest. It's interesting because even science supports this concept. In 1974, nearly halfway through an 84-day mission aboard the Skylab space station, Colonel William Pogue called NASA and requested a day of rest from mission control for his overworked and exhausted space crew. This is what he had to say, right? We have been overscheduled. We are just hustling the whole day. To work could be tiresome and tedious, though the view is spectacular. But no matter how spectacular the view and work must have been, even breathtaking views from space cannot relieve the human need for rest. So you know what NASA did? They said no. They refused the request, which led to the first strike in space. No joke, you can look it up, right? The crew went on strike for a day, just for a day. It's the first of its kind, because what's NASA gonna do? They disobeyed orders and the crew took a space Sabbath. In response, ground control was actually forced to change their policy. And to this day, NASA now schedules time for rest on all space travel. Even NASA factors in rest. To function how we were created to function, we have to dedicate time to rest how we were designed to rest. The concept is so important that God made a covenant with Israel over it. Rest, refreshment, and physical rejuvenation. But here's the point of all of this, is it leads to worship. It is holy. That time of rest isn't just to get a break. It isn't just to be refreshed. It's to worship. It's to worship God. It's to recognize his holiness. That's the point. It's not just to kick back and watch Netflix all day. It points to God. It points to our need for God. This idea of holy rest, we see more in the book of Ezekiel. It says in Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 10 through 13, it says, "So I led them out of the land of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness. I gave them my statutes and made known to them my rules, by which if any person does them, he shall live. Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not walk in my statutes, but rejected my rules, by which if a person does them, he shall live. And my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. Then I said, I would pour out my wrath upon them in the wilderness to make a full end of them." Wow. God takes Sabbath very serious. But he says, even in this again, I gave them this to sanctify them. I gave them a time not to work, to rest and worship. Ezekiel focuses on the idea that not only is Sabbath holy, but we are made holy through Sabbath. And practicing God-ordained and not practicing God-ordained and designated Sabbath is sinful. We're walking against God's will. And the truth is this, we are not capable of saving ourselves. We are not capable of making ourselves holy. We are not capable of having true rest without God. That rest isn't a day off just to rest. It's a day off to rest, be rejuvenated, and recognize the holiness of God and our need for him. So if your time of rest is filled with other types of work and not recognizing God, I think we may be doing it wrong. Our dependency on rest presents us an opportunity to grow closer to God. You see, the Ezekiel passage highlights life and death. It's the idea that rest and you will live, don't and you will die. And while we know that is physically true, right? That I guess we're done. There we go. That was weird. I think that was me, not Chris, by the way, in the back. The passage highlights that we know this, right? If we don't physically rest, at some point, if you don't sleep, you will die. You have to have it. But here's the thing, right? Spiritual health requires it as well. The emphasis in this passage is on spiritual death. It's the same spiritual death that is echoed throughout Scripture and is associated with sin, right? We see this in Genesis 3, where if you eat of the fruit of the tree, you will die. And while Adam and Eve didn't physically die, there was a spiritual death that occurred. The wages of sin is what? Death. Anyone who profanes the Sabbath will be put to death. The passage points directly to the fact that true spiritual rest is only found in God. Not doing your yard work or the extra chores around the house on Saturday or Sunday. If you've not incorporated God and worship into your rest time, you're not resting how you were designed to. Though Israel struggled to keep Sabbath, right? It actually never kept the law of the Sabbath of the land, which is a whole different sermon for a different day. They still developed a reverence for this seventh day of the week, which for them was traditionally on a Saturday. And over time, it led to strict cultural laws about what is and what is not allowed on the Sabbath. Certain number of steps, certain things about sticks caught in sandals. This is the world that Jesus was born into. And then when Jesus came into this legalistic Sabbath world, he did some things that rocked the boat. And he changed everything. You want to know what he did? Come back next week. Or you can watch online if you live in Tennessee. Because here's the honest truth, and this is the point of the series. We see that even Jesus does some level of work on the Sabbath. The Pharisees call him out on it. And we see that sometimes his rest was interrupted. And we all know this. We all live in a world where our rest, our Sabbath time gets interrupted. No matter how many times I go, well, I don't work on Fridays. That's my time with my family. It's my time to rest and to rejuvenate and to worship. You know what? Sometimes people die and they need me to do funerals on Fridays or Saturdays. So what do? Tell them, no, I can't. Each one of us has our struggles with this. And I think what Jesus does and how he frames Sabbath and how he frames not just the day, but more the concept of Sabbath is going to be something that each one of us wants to take to heart. That's what we're going to explore more next weekend for the rest of the series. But this is what I need you to understand before we even get into that our dependency on rest presents us an opportunity.